All right, well, let's get started. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully from the safety and comfort of your home or an equally cozy place. My name is Tony Wan, and I am the managing editor at Edsurge, and we are a news and media outlet that covers the people, the ideas, and the tools that shape the future of learning. And I will be moderating our conversation today. So thank you very much for joining. Just a little bit of background. This was a panel that was originally scheduled for South by Southwest EDU, that conference in Austin just about 2 months ago, before the pandemic turned, the world around on its head. But we're happy to get the show back on track and delighted that you are able to join us. Today, we're exploring something that may seem to some like a new emerging technology in the world of education, but which which our panelists have decades of experience in. So today, our conversations and the questions will all tie back to the central question of how will speech technology transform education? If you've been seeing headlines, or you may have some devices in your home yourself, you may have seen that the explosion of popular virtual assistant devices, such as the Alexas or in the Siris, have sparked an increased interest in exploring the potential of speech technology as a learning tool. And so today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the ways in which speech technology is being developed today in ways that can maximize its potential for education. And we'll also take some time to explore some of the challenges and assumptions surrounding this issue around topics like accessibility and data privacy. So I've certainly got lots of questions, but I certainly don't want to hog all of them. We are inviting the audience, you, the viewer, to ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button below. It's something that I will monitor regularly throughout the chat, and at various points in the conversation, I'd love to share your questions with our panelists. Please know that this conversation is being recorded, and we plan to post a summary of it as an article on Edsurge afterwards. So let's get started. You should see on the screen our list of distinguished panelists today. I've already introduced myself, and I will just briefly introduce them and have them share a little bit more about their work in this space. So just going from left to right, starting with Sunil. Sunil Gunderia is the Chief Strategy Officer at Age of Learning. They're the makers behind that popular ABC Mouse brand of education apps and services. Sunil, tell us a little bit more about kind of your work and your role at Age of Learning and how that ties a little bit more into this field of voice tech.
Sure. Age of Learning, as you mentioned, Tony, has been a leading provider of supplemental educational services, both in the US and globally. And over the last 10 years, we've had over 30 million kids on our platforms across our products, both here in the US and internationally. And one of the important things that we're looking for is constantly innovating and spending, investing in R&D that drives forward learning outcomes. And we certainly see speech technology in terms of beyond just as an interface, which you would see typically like on an Alexa platform or a Google Assistant, and looking at it in terms of how we can drive additional educational outcomes using that technology. And I can talk a little bit later about some specific implementations we've done where we've seen actual learning outcomes improving with speech tech.
Got it. Thank you, Sunil. Next on that roster lineup, we've got Satya Nitta. You are an AI entrepreneur and a former global head of AI solutions for learning at IBM Research. Satya, what does your work entail these days?
Thank you, Tony. Yeah. So these days, I'm actually the CEO and co-founder of an AI startup in Stealth. We are broadly in the AI assistant space, voice-activated AI assistant space. And we hope to come out of Stealth later this year. And our focus is broadly around, AI solutions for specific industries, starting with the education industry.
Got it. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Patricia Scanlon. She is the founder and CEO of SoapBox Labs. For those who are unfamiliar, can you share a little bit about your work at SoapBox, Patricia?
Sure. So we are Voice Tech for Kids. We have been laser focused on the area of speech technology for 7 years now. So we have built from the ground up a proprietary, high accuracy, privacy first product that we integrate and we license to third parties to integrate into their products across education. So that's literacy, English language learning, as well as kind of toys and robotics space too. So myself, I've been in the area for over 20 years now. I'm an engineer and focused on speech recognition technology before founding SoapBox Labs in 2013.
Wow, so you've been doing this for decades.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of changes in this area, yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
To kick off our conversation, I kind of want to get maybe get something out of the way. I think something that is an assumption or an association that many people may have these days when they think about speech technology, speech and voice technology. I think the reality is that I think many, some people, especially maybe those in education, may associate voice and speech tech with the smart speakers that are powered by the Alexas in this series that many of us have in our homes. I think that for many of us, that's the symbol and that's our association when we think about using voice and speech tech. And then some people may make a mental leap to saying, hey, like, are we talking about using Alexas and Google Homes in the classrooms? But, from our conversations earlier, I know that association to some of you is particularly limiting and perhaps even misleading when we're talking about speech tech and what it's capable of in education. So I'd love to kind of get, maybe get that squared away first. So we are not talking about Alexas and Siris in the classroom. Is that right?
No, sure. Yeah, definitely not. I mean, I've been in this area for a long time, and speech recognition itself is like an area that's 60 years old. I mean, probably one of the first applications people remember would have been a dictation system, So, for us, the way I've always looked at this is, the smart speakers are a great use case of speech recognition, but they aren't speech recognition themselves. They're a form of deployment of it. It's very useful in the world, and it's been something that it's been amazing because it's actually brought into people's homes and it's actually familiarized people with speech recognition. So now, where we spend the first couple of years of our business educating people about the power of speech recognition and what it could do in education for literacy, for language learning, and all these different things, what those smart speakers have done is open people's eyes to what's possible. But like you say, it's very much an underlying technology. It drives a smart speaker. There are many different use cases for speech recognition technology as a user interface, to be able to do a pronunciation assessment, to be able to do a fluency assessment, to be able to assess for English language learning, anything for helping a child practice. There's a whole world of use cases. What happens with the smart speakers is they try to predict what somebody's saying and what somebody wants. And what they do is they use kind of what it sounds like, but also on a predictive kind of model, a language model, and then natural language processing, natural language understanding, and intent detection to order to get the best possible experience for you. So that is not really what you're trying to do if you're putting speech recognition into an app for reading or English language learning, because what you're trying to do is see, well, can the child recall a sound or a word, and can they pronounce it correctly? Or what kind of fluency have they managed to achieve? It's a very different problem. So, in the education space, we like to be very clear about what we're talking about here.
Right. And if I can add to Tricia's point, is like it's absolutely device independent. So the idea you can use a smart speaker, but equally so it can be a part of a interactive experience where we use, as Tricia was saying, the speech rec to actually deliver an outcome. And as I mentioned in my introduction, we did a 6 months study, a full RCT, randomized control style study in China with our partner Tencent there on our learning program, English language learning program. And we found that a part of a digital experience, we had incorporated speech recognition technology for the exact reasons Patricia referred to test pronunciation, to create conversational moments with the child. And we were able to, the results were there were significant improvements in not only pronunciation, but when conversation skills and speech production skills. And those are all based with no human interface, no availability of a English language teacher, which is the case in a lot of the world that is looking for English language learning solutions, is that there aren't teachers available. So in this situation, we were able to show that, you know, using speech tech can actually derive outcomes that would otherwise not be expected.
Yeah, and if I can also add, right, what Trish alluded to is absolutely correct. What Alexa and Siri are basically consumer assistants that are built for a specific purpose, which is to bring you news or entertainment or ideas like that, or things like that. The underlying technology is basically much broader, much more capable of doing more useful things in education. And in fact, one of the best things you could do with speech rec is around language learning. But there are broader use cases as well, right? How do you control you know, technology broadly in classrooms or in schools, etc. How do you teach pronunciation? How do you diagnose dyslexia? These are purpose-built use cases, and so there's a broader point to be made about these AI technologies here, which is all the best AI today is built for purpose. And what I mean by that is you basically take the underlying speech rec, natural language understanding algorithms, and you build it and you build solutions to solve specific problems. And those things are going to be far better than something that hasn't ever been built to do that, but you're trying to kind of retrofit use cases like that on top of them. So it's a very exciting field. It's the possibilities are immense, and the entire thing is just beginning at this point in time from our perspective.
Right. So the questions that, you know, that you would ask that are specific to, you know, some educational skills, whether it's fluency or language learning, by nature, right, they're going to be pretty different than asking like what the weather is, or how long do I like put this in the oven for. I want to get back to Patricia. You say you've been doing this work for decades. So like, what is it about this moment now that makes it possible to develop speech technologies in a way that really maximizes its potential for education?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Look, it is a point in time that's different. You know, we've been here before. You know, it's not like speech recognition for language learning or literacy has not been tried before. It has. I mean, there's a great paper by the Cooney Institute, the center in New York there, from 2011 called The Technology for Developing Children's Language and Literacy. Highly recommend anybody reading it. It's actually called Bringing Speech Recognition to the Classroom. And that's one of the first papers I read and kind of digested in this, and saying, you know, it has been known that this is a valuable component for effective, cost-effective, you know, potential for education, but the accuracy has never been there. And that's really key. There's a lot of factors that have changed. Deep learning has been, you know, made a huge leap forward for the area of speech recognition, collecting real world data, being able to understand real world problems, being able to use it without a headset mic and tablets. A 5-year-old can do it conveniently. There's a huge amount of things that were needed. And this paper talks particularly, and what we've always seen, you can't keep bringing out mediocre technology. You know, you can't keep bringing out machine learning, AI technology that kind of works, you know, because what happens is you frustrate, you lose the trust of the parents and the teachers and the kids, right? So if you tell a kid that they're wrong when they're right, you're going to destroy their confidence. If you tell them they're right when they're wrong, you're going to cause a problem with their education because you're reinforcing an error. And you're never going to be able to. So at this point in time, we've been working for 7 years, laser focused on this problem to get the accuracy to the point where it's now on a par with human evaluators. And that's key. That's where you're going to see a step change, where people will start adopting speech recognition, because they've had it before, they've done the studies, it just never got widespread adoption because the accuracy was so bad. So I think that's where we're now at a point where we could have brought our technology out many years ago. We didn't, because we were waiting for the accuracy to be there, because we know when we bring it, that's when you want widespread adoption. And 2020 is it's time, right? Like, you know, it's time. I think people are hungry for it now. So.
And then drilling on the accuracy point just a little bit deeper, you're saying that it's possible to be more accurate now because we're able to capture just richer sets of data and we have better processing abilities to capture and use that data. Is it a data problem?
There's so many factors in this, right? For 7 years, we focused first on the data, being able to, collect it in a, compliant way with rules, be able to collect it in real world scenarios, collect it from a wide range of kids and of hugely varying situations. And then you leverage deep learning to build child specific models, right? So children are very different acoustically, right? So they're actually, their physical vocal tract, vocal folds are very different. So if you try and take something that's been built for adults, which is what had happened previously, and you try and deploy it for kids, or you add a bit of kids data and you hope that you've skewed the models enough that it will work, it will only ever work to a certain level of accuracy. You're never going to break 80% accuracy, right? And then you got to take into account the behaviors of a child. They're not how adults behave. They don't kind of straighten up and think about what they're going to say. They kind of blurt things out. Their language is so different to adults. So all these components we've had to be able to take into account to be able to deliver high accuracy solution. And when you try and adapt a system that's built for adults for the system, it's never going to work to the level you need it to be acceptable in education.
That sounds like it could be a lot of work if everybody is kind of, doing it. It could be a lot of work, I guess, if all developers are trying to build these tools and systems from scratch and get all that data. Is that what you're doing, Sunil or Satya, or is there going to be like a common base of accurate and reliable children's data that offers you a common place for which you can build tools on top of?
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, our perspective on it is, we work with third parties that are developing the core AI technology, and what we ensure is that the solutions that we build work for children. So we do extensive amounts of testing with children in our offices and remotely now, to ensure that the user interface, when you add something like speech rec into the mix, is working. And to Patricia's point, inter-rater reliability is super important. Giving false negatives or false positives can destroy either what learning outcome you're trying to get, or try to create misconceptions, and or really create a high level of frustration that are going to get kids to quit the program. So it's very important that you have models that work, and kids and the learners getting the feedback they need, and it works within the context of the program that we have out in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, so we're a little bit similar to Age of Learning. So we look at what Trish is building with SoapBox Labs and platform technologies like that as fundamentally enabling and very valuable. Right. So not only do they they specialize in enabling children's speech to be as accurate as possible, they also do something highly valuable that Trish alluded to at the beginning, which is they provide a way to call upon speech recognition services in a private and secure fashion that's FERPA and COPPA compliant. So from our perspective, it's very difficult for solution providers, application makers to actually build all these things from ground up, given that it's taken SoapBox Labs 7 years to get here. For us, it makes far more sense to build on top of capabilities like that and build solutions that help the constituents that we are serving. So what we suspect is likely to happen is as more and more data becomes available, and as they understand better how to tweak, how to tune, how to enable even more powerful capabilities to be exposed, more and more solution providers like us will come to the table and build bespoke applications in this space.
I want to get into maybe a little bit, maybe get a survey of some of the more specific subjects or skills in which you've applied or you've seen speech recognition technology be applied in ways that seem promising. I think we've already alluded to, using speech tech to improve speaking and speech abilities. Sounds kind of obvious, sounds kind of natural, but what other kinds of subject or skills have you seen this technology really deliver on its potential and promise on?
So I can jump in here.
Sorry, go on.
You want to take it, Trish? Go for it.
Yeah, go for it, Satya. No, go for it, please.
All right. So, well, I'll give you a couple of use cases that are interesting, and of course, I expect Sunil and Trish to build on top of that. So there is a professor from Stanford called Bruce McCandless who has written some papers on tone analytics, which is the tone that teachers use in a classroom apparently has huge implications on learning outcomes, and it's actually very intriguing. And it begins to touch upon the kinds of possibilities that exist in this space. So imagine if you are collecting audio data from within classrooms, and then you're correlating them with learning outcomes, and then using them as a training tool and a teaching tool for teachers to improve during PD, right? You can actually start affecting learning outcomes at fairly broad scales. So that's an example of some really interesting applications that are possible with speech recognition. There are additional examples. The well-known example of controlling other devices that Alexa does in the home. There's aspects of that you can bring into various facilities, etc. But I thought tone analytics and improving instruction was very germane to this discussion.
Sure, I'll add to that. There is, a fascinating approach that can use speech recognition that we're working with now on being able to diagnose or be able to screen for reading difficulties, so indicate a high potential for reading difficulties like dyslexia for pre-literate kids. So before a child is ever able to read, the research exists out there already, but the way it would be done now would be pen and paper assessments, right? And to be able to use speech technology. So you're talking about being able to assess kids and screen them at scale using speech technology, which is not possible today. It's not being done today because whether it's resources or time in the classroom, that it's not possible. So using speech recognition technology to be able to help in those type of scenarios, to be able to regularly assess kids for fluency, to be able to assess whether they're falling off, do they need intervention, do they need to be able to quickly, long before the end of the year or those summative assessments that happen very periodically, to be able to give kids the opportunity to catch up with their peers, whether it's through fluency assessments or screeners. I mean, they're kind of exciting in the fact that it takes 4 times longer to intervene with a child age 8 than it does with a 4 or 5-year-old, right? There's costs associated with that. There's damage to the child and their social development as well. So I think there's things like that can have a huge social benefit as well as, cost-effective deployments as well.
Yeah, and I would just add that, what Trish said and Satya was saying about pushing out the idea that we can provide formative feedback without a one-to-one with a human and in more situations, pushing it out. I mean, there's a lot of science behind, how formative feedback can really benefit kids, and the idea that, especially in the environment we are now with school closures, here in the US and around the world, the ability of using something like speech rec to serve as a way to provide kids meaningful feedback in terms of how they can improve reading or their fluency in regards to reading and or their pronunciation is really very, very compelling in terms of a application.
Okay. And in terms of adoption, right? I think just in technology in general, no matter how awesome or how powerful a certain technology is, there's always this the other element is that, hey, it needs to be adopted, or people need to buy into it or be comfortable with it. When it comes to speech, speech tech in schools or in educational setting. Do you think it's getting to a place where it's people are getting more familiar with it and are more open to implementing it in the classroom or knowing how to do that? I'm trying to get your take on, in your experiences with schools as you introduce this tech, what kinds of kind of the questions or concerns that you have to address are.
Yeah, and we actually license to our partners who already have the technology so they often have digital platforms in the schools already, and they actually have, millions of kids on these platforms. So for us, we work with them to make sure that they are getting in the technology. We help educate on speech recognition. They're taking the feedback from the ground up. The ground up is often the teachers and the parents who want speech recognition, and often they just don't understand why it's not there already because they have it in their home. So often it's a ground up kind of demand. Often it's the ed tech companies themselves that want to innovate and kind of take a market lead or to claw back some of the market share. So they want to be able to bring out a kind of key killer feature as well, like that. One can give practice to kids and disclose this, as Sunil was saying, that feedback loop that they don't have right now. But adoption in the schools, I think, is a case of, it was tentative, there was interest, it's slow, but you just saw in the last quarter, in particular in the last couple of months of shutdown, kind of a need to put that engagement into the products. That it's more of an urgency we're seeing now. Before it would be great, and we understand that there's a feedback loop that needs to happen, but now you see more of an urgency because people are beginning to realize their digital products in the home don't work as well as they used to in the school. So everybody's busy trying to figure that out now, but I think the last couple of months and the next 6 months to a year will be, you'll see an acceleration because of need, absolutely.
And we've seen it on the paper grading and the paper writing. There's AI it's usually through a product that a school will buy. But technology, with AI grading systems for written papers is really commonplace now. And certainly I'm seeing it with my kids in high school and middle school and even in elementary school in terms of using technology-aided solutions to grade papers. So expanding that is as the next wave of products that utilize speech rec within our speech technology. It'll just start to happen. I think it's not because it solves a pain point that exists currently, and so I would expect it to continue to be more and more prevalent in education.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I think we have to overcome hurdles like privacy, etc., right, and how we treat children's voice. But adoption will follow the number of solutions that actually provide real value, right? And so as there are more and more solutions come into the classroom, there will be greater adoption. To be sure, it's very early days, but we definitely expect what happened in the consumer space to happen in schools.
Right. Well, Satya, you opened up the can of worms of privacy and related to some security considerations that are now very much a part of the conversations around education technology, and when we talk about data, and especially in this context about students' voice. Speak a little bit more to about how the ways that you all are building these speech technologies. Like, how are you building it in a way that does ensure the privacy and security of student data?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not really a privacy and security expert. I'm much more of a technologist like Trish. But I will give you kind of my take and how I expect the solution, how I expect these concerns to be handled, and how to a certain extent we're handling it as well. So to a large extent, the issue around data privacy comes down to how consumer assistants treat data, right? Children's data, adults' data, etc. Which is, they reserve the right to take the data and use them to train their models better. They also reserve the right to use the data to potentially sell to their advertisers, so they have a better profile of who it is who's using these technologies, and so they can be advertised to in a more appropriate fashion or a more personalized fashion, etc. So if, COPPA and FERPA, again, I think maybe my panelists might know much more than I do, but they have specific protections around children's data and data in these kinds of right, sensitive applications. And these involve things like you can't actually monetize this data, you can't use it to improve your models, and so on and so forth. So by and large, what we expect is as speech technologies become more prevalent in the classroom, vendors will figure out, they will work with people like SoapBox Labs, right? They will figure out how to either treat the data in a much more compliant fashion on the cloud, or do the entire thing locally on device and basically delete the data as soon as the classification has to be done. And a combination of these will basically enable people to get past the privacy hurdles from my perspective. At least legally. It's a consumer sentiment is a whole different story, but at least from a legal perspective, we could meet these regulations.
Yeah, when we started 7 years ago, I'd spent, like I said, an awful long time working in AI before that, and realizing the need for data and the value for data when you're building high accuracy AI systems, right? So well, we decided, I was a parent as well, right? So I had 2 young kids as well at the time. So I could see the need and I could see the problems that were coming down the line if it wasn't done right. So it wasn't cheaper and it wasn't easier to be completely, COPPA compliant, GDPR compliant. And at the time it was like the Wild West of data flying around and nobody was being compliant. So we invested kind of deeply in the beginning to build a privacy first company, to know that we had very strictly no competing business models. We were going to be an independent speech recognition company. We were only ever going to use the data that we collected at the time anyway, to be able to update the models and improve our AI, so we could take on big tech and everyone else who was trying to do this. And that's important, and innovation is important to be able to bring technology, but to do so very mindfully and very carefully all the while. What we've done recently now is start moving some of our models offline. We have a partnership now to be able to put it embedded on a chip, because we want to be able to evolve, right, over time, and that's where the need and that's where the market wants to go. So there's 2 very easy ways to do this. It's to be not have competing business models and be very transparent in what the data is used for and what it will never be used for. And I think that can be a little bit of an issue at the moment. It's an easy thing to fix, I think. I think it's just, kids, when you give your permission as a parent or teachers or schools do, it shouldn't just be used as adult data and then have at it. Like, that's the issue. We need to stay on the right side of this and be very transparent in what happens for the kids' sake into the future when somebody else is giving permission for their data to be used. And that's been a stance that we've taken, because it's sensitive for adults. It's even more sensitive for kids. Like saying with FERPA and COPPA and all these different rules, you can be compliant. What teachers often want to do is be able to listen to the audio as well, to be able to confirm and parents want to be able to listen back. So you want to be able to accommodate all those data flows. People can actually listen back to their own children and students, but equally be very careful that you don't wade into storing data unnecessarily.
I have several more questions, but again, a reminder to the audience, you are welcome and invited to ask questions in the Q&A function of this the Zoom call as well. I do want to talk a little bit about the past couple of months, how the pandemic may have shaped your work. It certainly has thrown everything off schedule. It's moved this this Move panel online. But I mean, have you had any observations? Now that many people are doing remote schooling or schooling at home and learning from home, whether or not some of the use cases for speech tech are a little bit different than maybe what you had imagined or envisioned in school. School's closed. In some ways, I imagine that the ways that people are using technology tools these days may maybe resemble more of a consumer attitude or mindset than something happening in the classroom.
Trish, you want to take it, or do you want me to?
Sure. I mean, what we're seeing a lot is more, some of our clients were very much looking at the assessment one, where now they're kind of going, wow, well, assessment's important, but so is practice. I mean, that's, so let's say we were first of all looking at things, but now we're maybe looking a little broader. Maybe people were looking at, just looking at older kids, but now they're looking at the whole issues, because I think one of the interesting things is that, we talk about summer fade, when the kids go home for the summer, and by September time, their literacy, it's like, faded a lot. I mean, we're adding several months on this, and we actually don't know when it's going to stop. So when kids are at the very vulnerable stage, when they're just emergent readers and they're early readers, while everybody kind of, thinks about, we want to assess their fluency, we want to see where they are, but, there is a very big danger now. You're going to get kids, and particularly disadvantaged kids, who are not going to be getting any regular practice that they were getting in school. So we're beginning to see more interest in that practice, starting to be able to, because people are worried, right? They're worried what's going to happen to these kids if this lockdown, they're extended or they happen again, and not everybody is lucky enough to have a parent to sit there with them at home and help them 15 minutes a day with their reading or what they were doing in schools.
For that matter, a parent that's qualified to give them the formative feedback they need.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to Trisha's point, and what we discussed earlier, the idea that you can provide, real-time guidance and feedback using technology will, continue to have the child learn as they might have as in school and in a home environment, which without this technology may not be as easily or readily available.
Yeah, I mean, there was kids that were, were in overcrowded classrooms, very few resources before all this happened. This is just compounding problems, like that were already there, and we've yet to see the real impact of this, like on kids' education and their, their long-term the effects of this. Like.
Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, one of the things that the pandemic has exposed, or at least brought to even a brighter light, is the what they call the digital divide. Access to technology between the haves and have-nots. We've seen reports that not everybody in the same country or in the same county may have the same access to devices or broadband, and this is one of the overriding concerns when it comes to ed tech. Is it something that will widen the gap or bridge the gap? We'd love to get your thoughts about, how can we ensure that speech technology avoids being part of the problem or helps to solve the problem, and not be part of the problem that widens the tech gap between the privileged and the have-nots.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. All right, so I'll throw some stats into the mix. So I live in New York State. The New York public schools are is the single largest school district in the United States, with over 1 million kids. And so when the crisis hit and schools started shutting down, and school districts around the United States started scrambling to provide distance learning solutions, the whole issue of equity came to the fore, right? And so in the New York public school system, over 10% of the children, which is 100,000 kids, and that's a staggering number, do not have either access to one-on-one devices at home, or have access to the internet. Right? And to be sure, this is a problem that has to be fixed by the government, by school districts, right? With various philanthropic organizations coming in, and we do expect through programs like the E-rater, etc., that this digital divide will be plugged, right? Because what this actually highlighted is the inequities that exist in a very stark way, right? So now the second part of the problem is, let's say you do get to fall of 2020 or spring of 2020, a lot of children have devices at home and they have access to internet. You still have the issue of are parents qualified to help these kids or not? Do they have the time, etc.? Which is where some of the applications that my fellow panelists have brought up, like reading companions and all these kinds of things, which kind of act as a supplemental tutoring system, really do come to the fore. I believe personally that speech technology and broadly AI assistants are going to be a force for the good to help level the playing field, because not everybody has educated parents at home or parents with time to spare for schooling. But if the first part of the problem, access to devices, access to the internet, is fixed, I believe broadly AI speech technologies will basically help fix the rest of the problem. Maybe not all the way, but at least they'll go a long way towards creating a more level playing field.
There's a lot to be that is possible right now on device, right? So, I mean, you have a technology issue when you got access to tablets, cheap devices, you've got a broadband problem. You can fix the broadband problem by taking more of the technology offline. Cutting the snips to the cloud, it's there, it's needed to update content, but it is possible to deliver a certain cohort of data and information on a device these days. I mean, the cost is coming down of processors, the cost of cheap devices is getting affordable right now. Broadband issues are probably going to stay a little longer, but we'll see. So, and as the processing capabilities of these cheaper devices increases, I think that's where you'll see fixing some way of the problem and bridging that divide, that more kids can get access cheaply to these devices.
Yeah, and my point of view is, I think held by our panelists, is that we see. I mean, there's a learning crisis before school closures due to COVID. It was already in existence. 60% of our kids are already not achieving minimum proficiency. This is in the U.S. Minimum proficiency in reading or math by the time they're in fourth grade. The research is very clear that this is going to be the impact is going to be greater on low SES communities because of these access issues. We've shown, certainly in the U.S. as a country, we've been able to bridge a lot of the gaps, which was 10 years ago we didn't have connectivity at schools. We've bridged that gap over the last 10 years through our E-rate program. We're now almost well over 95% of our schools have bandwidth, and that will support every classroom. I think as we look at infrastructure spending, coming out of this crisis, there's a real opportunity to really think about both device and bandwidth as utilities that need to be made universally available, and maybe discussions on extending E-rate and in terms of ensuring that everybody has access to technology that's going to help our kids achieve the outcomes they need to achieve. And I think that's a bigger discussion than we're probably going to solve on this panel today, but it's certainly hopefully on the minds of many in power and policymakers, both here in the US and around the world.
Yeah, Patricia, you made a couple of comments kind of alluding to the fact that it is possible to tap into the potential of speech tech and AI without having to connect to the internet or the cloud. And that sounds pretty, sounds like it solves, one big bucket of the problem, or it could.
Yeah. It depends on what you're talking about, because you look at India, where Jio is an overbuilder, it launched a purely digital network, and they have $10 devices there, and they have their own unique OS, and It's serving 600 million people in India through a digital network, and that relies heavily on KaiOS, which is based on a voice network. And so, or a lot of voice interfaces. So there's a lot of different ways to solve this problem. I mean, offline is certainly one of the ways we can look at doing things, but you know, a lot of the background processing happening off devices is quite valuable as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for kids, I think that you'll find more and more, you know, offline is going to be where parents are going to want it to go, right? I mean, you know, the privacy issues, the connectivity issues, the listening issues, you know, I mean, the wake word stuff, the comfort level as a parent, you know, of young kids, I think that is where it's going to go when you talk about toys, robots. What happened is most people just assume that everything needs to happen in the cloud, and it does for content. I totally agree with you, Sunil, on that. Like that, you do need to be able to access and update content or homework, or constantly be able to feed back to parents and teachers. But there is a movement, and a very certain one, that is going to happen, is that the processing of audio and video can happen on device and cheaply as well. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very recent change in the field. It's only in the last year or so that this has been technically possible. Like, a lot of it meant you had to have so many limitations previously, or the cost of the processor was too high, right? Or would drive the price of the device up. A lot of those are being addressed recently. So I think you're going to see a big shift in the next year to a lot of the times. And what can happen is, as well as, you can increase your battery life, right, by not totally constantly transmitting to your wireless, right? I mean, that would rapidly extend the usability of a device, like particularly for kids that, constantly needing to charge something. So I think there's a lot of benefits in it, and it's where the technology is going on the edge. Is something, is a movement that's happening, that's been widely and gladly accepted in a lot of places.
Okay. Yeah, just to echo that, right? We also believe that completely. We are actually an AI at the edge company. And what's actually enabled this to happen is successive advances in processing power due to Moore's law, processing power, processing capacity. And so it would have been unthinkable just 5-6 years ago to be able to shrink the deep learning algorithms and get them to be stored locally and to actually infer locally. But because of Moore's law, all this is possible. And as Trish alluded to, one huge advantage of this is you save power locally. You also save bandwidth. You don't actually constantly keep streaming data back and forth. And there is this huge benefit that you can basically store the data and do the classification and then delete it locally without sending it to the cloud. And so the whole notion of privacy, is basically addressed by this approach. So yeah, we're huge fans of this, and I'm completely with Trish in that we will see a lot more of this happening. Even the big tech consumer assistants are going this way. The Google Pixel phone, I believe, has local speech recognition. The iPhone might, to a certain extent, at least limited speech recognition locally. But we expect to see a lot more of this happening in the next year or two.
We do have a couple of questions from the audience. One of them is about the I'll just paraphrase it. A lot of our conversation is kind of focused on the impact and potential benefits of students, especially if they are at home, maybe alone or with parents who are not trained or feel comfortable with helping them. But what are some of the implications for teachers in schools? Or like, how do you think about the role of the teacher and what their relationship is with these voice and speech recognition technologies?
We always view this as kind of classroom efficiencies. I think sometimes people kind of liken it to technology for technology's sake, or kids going to have hours of sitting in front of these screens. I mean, a lot of it for us when we started looking at this was talking to teachers about their biggest pain points. Especially for having 30 kids in a class, and they were saying, knowing where each child is in the class at any one time, or knowing when I do get that precious 10 minutes with that kid, you know, knowing where they are, you know, what sounds or words or what kind of fluency or what level they're at, or whether it's slipped, whether they've come on, would be really helpful. Because while there's a huge amount of research out there to how you can help literacy and language learning, a lot of it is about that regular practice, you know, constant assessment, you know, feedback, that formative assessment. And the idea would be these tools can help teachers to, you know, have information at their hand at all times. Like, so when they do get that one-on-one time, it's really efficient, and they can get to the problems, or they can catch kids quickly who are slipping, right? So if a kid is using this kind of read practice thing, you know, with formative assessment, 15 minutes a day, and it's been fed back to the parent or teacher, that they could then see very frequently if a child is needing intervention.
Yeah,
and I think that's where you can catch them up quick, right?
I agree with Trish. I think, you know, the Digital Promise just recently put out a paper on learner variability, and the reality is that both teachers and parents recognize that teaching to the middle, which a lot of times teachers have to do, given that they have, you know, 20 to 30 kids in the classroom, and that there's an agreement that technology can help tailor instruction to individual children, and help teachers do the same by understanding where those differences lie. It's really a part of an ongoing, you know, how can you use technology effectively to help all kids get to a desired outcome, and using technology in that way, whether it be speech or whether it be adaptive platforms, and that we're working and developing on as well, I think it's a part of the solution in overcoming what has been, you know, a learning crisis with, you know, so many kids not getting to where they need to. And it's a shift in our educational models over time in terms of how we do that.
The second question that we have is, it says, is there any reading comprehension component built into the assessment tool? I may reframe that question a little bit to maybe ask, you know, are the speech recognition technology assessments now capable of assessing like reading comprehension, you know, verbal?
Yeah, it's a really nice part of it, because, you know, you don't just want kids mindlessly reading, right? And an element of fluency is that a kid can read effortlessly and understand at the same time. So you want to be able to take that. I mean, it's quite easy to be able to ask a kid, you know, as a teacher would, or as a parent would, when you ask a question, you have in your head, or at the very least, you know, a number of likely acceptable answers. You know, I mean, how a kid was how did little Johnny feel when, you know, when he lost his ball? Well, he felt sad, disappointed, you know, angry, frustrated, whatever. You know, there's probably a limited set of them, and speech recognition systems can, you know, these assessment tools can build in that, right? They can build in the question answer. It's kind of like a little conversation with the child as well. Like, and when we work on this, it's the ed tech providers, the people who build the actual child-facing technology, that will build in what a teacher would think as well, and how they would mark it. What are all the acceptable answers, and then the system comes up with the most likely one, and then that's used to do the assessment. Like, so, yeah, it's a nice, effective part of any fluency assessment.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have. Decoding alone is really not that helpful. You need to decode and be able to comprehend what you're reading. So any solution worth its salt will cover both components.
Back to you, Patricia, a little bit. So your business model is that you license the technology for other developers to build on top of. Are there any use cases? Have you seen any of your partners have use cases or use it for subjects or skills that, you know, may not seem very obvious to people when they think about speech tech? I'm trying to get a sense of what the range of, you know, current use cases.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the toy robotic space is kind of cool, because you can actually have kind of conversations with kids. They can be educational conversations. They can be diving into, you know, you can create an experience with a child. You know, and sometimes that can be, you know, not just your traditional read this, you know, what's your comprehension question, but kind of eke out of a child, well, you know, tell me a farm animal, you know, cow, how many legs does a cow have, 4, what's 4 plus 4, and you can actually have kind of this fun engagement with a child, and using their voice is quite magical and engaging for a child, and they don't even realize it's an educational exercise. The other one, as I mentioned earlier, the one that stands out to me always is just dyslexia screening for pre-literate kids. Just the fact that you can actually detect reading difficulties before they can ever even read, and they do that by this method called rapid naming. So you show a child a number of pictures, a sequence, and they have to name them, like tree, dog, apple, house, cow, very obvious ones. And apparently, and like I said, the research for this has been around for quite a while. There's some amazing research groups around the US have been working on this. The ability for the child to sequence the pictures and name them is an indicator for potential reading difficulties. So if you think about it, the speech recognition system knows what the sequence is, and then just is able to kind of place it, saying, were they able to do that? And then the algorithms that have been derived from the researchers can actually do the predictions on where. So it's just allowing that to be automated is quite, for me, that's huge. So we're quite varied. We work with clients, we're working with the Florida Center for Reading Research as well, and supporting their efforts on being able to look at, the ability for speech recognition to, first of all, can we correlate with inter-rater, human assessors? And secondly, bias, I think, is actually one of the most interesting aspects of this, is that, there's human bias when you're assessing how well a child read. And I think it's quite a well-known problem in education, that, kids with certain dialects, that is correct for them. They're not, they're not saying things incorrectly. They're not reading incorrectly, but sometimes people would assess it differently. And then there's speech recognition biases, right? So, we've all read about these in the papers that, if the speech recognition system has been overly trained on a certain accent from a certain gender, for ethnicity, it's going to behave better for them. So to be able to make sure that the speech recognition systems that are used in education don't have bias, that all these different dialects and the way kids read and what they say is correct for the child. It isn't just, it's not subjective, it should be highly objective. And I think that's probably going to be one of the standout features of using speech recognition for assessment, is that objectivity,
And it's
for
likely
the kids
that,
and the outcomes.
and as we wrap up, I think it's likely that we have some tech developers in our call today. I just want to get a sense of what is the bar like for a developer interested in using, leveraging speech tech? Like, do I need to know, have a lot of background expertise, or is it going to be a thing like building websites or building apps where, there are going to be tools that just make it a lot easier?
Yeah. I mean, it's building the API kind of efficiently and easily. So we always designed it in a way that, we had a client set up and get their technology out in Asia to do English language learning in 48 hours, right? It was that simple to integrate, and there was no expertise, there was no customization needed. They just got the API key, it's a RESTful simple input, and they were hitting the server, doing those assessments, pronunciation assessments on the kids really quickly, and it proved really effective, for them.
Make it sound so simple.
Yeah, you do need developers, right? You need a few developers. We'll give them credit on that. Yeah.
Got it. All right. Well, we are about just on time. So I want to thank you all for reconvening for this virtual panel that was originally set for South by Southwest EDU back in March. And I want to thank all of the attendees for joining us today. As I said, this call is this meeting was recorded, and I'll be sharing a summary of some of the highlights from this conversation afterwards. So I want to thank Sunil, thank Satya, and thank Patricia for joining us and lending your insights today.
Great. Thanks, John.
Pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.